All right, so welcome to the high silver floor cap with a 21-21 cap for the top position players and pitchers for that tournament. Average overall rating is 81, which, when you factor in the floor of 75 overall for every card, that leaves you with a total of 171 points above 75 essentially to use for all of your players. It's modern era stats and strategy. So 5 starting pitchers with limited pitch counts, 100, 110, maybe the occasional 120, but generally 100, 110, with at least 7 or 8 relievers as well. The WOBA for the tournament was 353 with a league ERA of 4.51. This time I remembered to get the percentages of the batters used. There were 440 total batters used, 425 pitchers were used. For the batters, 56% were righties, 34.5% were lefties, and 9.5% were switch hitters. For pitchers, it was 67% righty and 33% lefty. So definitely very heavy on the lefty-righty splits for the pitchers. You are predominantly going to see right-handed pitchers. You know what? And I think next time I might try and maybe break that down into starters and relievers to see what kind of starting rotations you're predominantly facing. But I think that in general it should hold up. Basically, you're going to see predominantly right-handed starting pitching, along with bullpens as well that are mixed and match a little bit more than that. And you can see Bob Bailey with his 21,000 plate appearances, followed by Donnie Bush, were the kind of the top tier there, along with Mickey Tettleton and Greg Luzinski, and then of course it kind of trails down. You see a smattering of like Platinum Series 1 cards in here with Tettleton and Luzinski. There's some live series rewards in here in Don Money and Boog Powell. Tournament reward, John Kruk gets used. He's one of the popular ones. There's some good Negro League cards in here. There's a wide variety of silver cards that can be used in this format. So, sorting these in reverse order by their WOBA. Starting out at number 15 is third baseman Kevin Seitzer. And now I'm going to need to move again because now I'm blocking the stats. Let's go back up here for these. It cuts off a little bit of the ratings, but you don't really need to see the end of the bar. So anyway, so Kevin Seitzer had 2,500 plate appearances, a 339 WOBA. The weighted runs above average, I calculated, instead of going per 600, I did it per 100 plate appearances. So per 100 plate appearances, negative 1.32, so just a little bit below average there. His score rating, obviously, 69.39 versus lefties and 60.43 versus righties. Obviously, very splits heavy versus the left-handed pitching, which is, I think that obviously when we look back at, with the fact that 67% of the pitchers that he faced were righties, I think is why we see him coming out being a little bit below average, and that very heavy versus lefty split not able to help him out. So he's definitely a platoon bat or a backup first baseman and third baseman. He can do either one of those things serviceably, and only costs you 1 point towards the cap. At number 14, a bit of an odd one here, maybe because of the predominance of right-handed pitching, we find Nick Markakis in right field. A little bit of a smaller sample size with 1,600 plate appearances, a WOBA of 339. So basically, almost a virtual tie with Kevin Seitzer. His weighted runs above average per 100 was negative 1.3 versus the negative 1.32 that we saw from Seitzer. So, very, very, very much basically a virtual tie here. He can only play right field, lacks a little bit of range, but good arm in right field, and doesn't cost you any of your cap points because he's only 75 overall. At number 13, this one surprised me a little bit, and I don't know, maybe it's because some of the smaller sample sizes around him. but I would have expected this one to be higher. Left fielder Greg Luzinski, 11,314 plate appearances, a 340 WOBA with a negative 1.23 runs above average per 100. Again, splits heavy versus left-hand. Well, not heavy, but definitely a split versus lefties with a 70.81 score and a 67.32 score. And not a fielder that you want to have doing a lot of fielding. Definitely is more of a designated hitter candidate than he is an actual left fielder. So maybe there's a little bit of a penalty to his bat because he's only playing DH instead of playing in the field. At number 12, this one was also a bit of a surprise. Richie Ashburn, 1,600 plate, just over 1,600 plate appearances, a 341 WOBA, negative 1.14 weighted runs above average per 100. Again, you see the low scores there, 51.16, 54.96. Obviously, he's better versus righties as a left-handed bat. Only costs you 2 points. And, but on the flip side of that, he covers all three outfield positions. So he makes for a solid bench bat, I think, is where he is. Assuming he's predominantly used off the bench. I don't think that he's necessarily a starting option. I think that he's a bench option. At number 11, another guy who can cover all three of the positions, a little bit better hitter and a little bit better fielder than Richie Ashburn, center fielder Lloyd Mosby. 1,691 plate appearances, a 342 WOBA. In those plate appearances, negative 1.03 weighted runs above average, and a bat score of 56.27 and 64.81 versus righties. So he definitely plays up a little bit, I think, because of, again, the predominance of right-handed pitching that we see in this tournament. At number 10, we get our first tournament edition. It's Willie Jones at third base. 2,406 plate appearances, a 342 WOBA. So basically, yeah, another virtual tie here with Lloyd Mosby, just slightly edging him out on some percentage points past the thousandth decimal point. Negative 1.01 weighted runs above average per 100. Very strong versus lefties. The problem is there's not a lot of left-handed pitching for him to feast on, which is why I think you find him lower than you would possibly expect, because again, it's a very, very left-handed heavy batting profile with the big score versus lefties and a weaker 61.89 versus righties. But he plays solid defense at third. Range maybe a little bit low, but a very strong arm, which is definitely an important factor for third base. All right, taking a minute here to catch up on some things. Thank you, Boo1260, The Walking Dead, and Me Shmoo for the follows while we're at it. Next, another third baseman, Edwin Encarnacion, 2,104 plate appearances, a 344 WOBA, negative 0.85 on the runs above average per 100 plate appearances, which again, if you go deep into the tournament, is about what you would expect to see in one tournament. Covers first and third base. A little bit better versus righties, but also a little bit more even, which is why I think he's higher, kind of higher up there as far as the batting profile. Low BABIP, lots of home runs, lots of walks though, which I think we've seen in this year's Perfect Team engine. That carries a lot of weight. The power and the walks combination definitely is one that plays up. Better at first base, obviously. You don't really want him playing third base. Definitely a first base option. But only costing you 1 point. It's not a bad option. But there are a few better ones out there still. At number 8, it's center fielder Kenny Lofton with 5,122 plate appearances, a 346 WOBA. Again, just getting closer to the tournament average at negative 0.65. Better versus right. He's a left-handed hitter, so better versus righties. 61-61 versus lefties. 64-41 versus righties, which again, I keep mentioning it because it keeps coming up, but we see somebody who's stronger versus righties a little bit higher up on this list. Not great in the outfield, but not terrible either. Obviously, the error is his weakest point, but 75 range I think is serviceable for this type of tournament. And then, of course, he has a very strong arm in center field. At number 7, it's our most popular player. It's third baseman Bob Bailey. 21,649 plate appearances for a 348 WOBA, so just slightly below league average there. Negative .54 runs above average per 100. But again, I think the problem that he's running into is the same problem that Willie Jones is running into. With 74.23 versus lefty score and a 62.09 versus righty score, there's just not enough left-handed batters for him to really, for you to really take advantage of what his hitting profile is. So maybe, you can use him on the bench for free. You can platoon him if you can find somebody. But again, if you're platooning him, you're playing into, the fact that there aren't that many left-handed pitchers around. LFC USA, thank you for the follow. At number 6, we find left fielder Sid Gordon, 4,975 plate appearances, a 354 WOBA, so basically just slightly above league average. We get our first positive silver hitter, 0.02 runs above average per 100 plate appearances. Again, he's somebody plays corner outfield or sort of plays third base, but really you only want him playing in the corner outfield position. 71.69 versus lefties, 67.73 versus righties. So again, we find somebody who's very, very strong versus lefties. A little bit more of a balance here, but there's just not enough left-handed pitchers to really take advantage of how much better he is versus lefties than he is versus righties. At number 5, third baseman George Kell. Again, this one only costs you 4 points. Doesn't hit for a lot of home runs, but he doesn't strike out and has an unbelievable gap score. 2,937 plate appearances, a 354 WOBA. Again, just slightly edging out Sid Gordon on very minuscule percentage points there. 0.07 weighted runs above average per 100. Stronger versus, again, we see that 10-point difference there between lefties and righties. So very, very strong versus lefties. But you're just, you're playing him because he's a very good option. But again, you're struggling a little bit, I think, here because there's, with the 67-33 split on the pitching, you want to have him as, I think, available in case you do run into somebody that's trying to run a lot of lefty pitchers. As I don't know why you would, though, because, I don't know. There's a whole strategy thing there that you can get into on trying to, go against the grain. But, again, somebody who's stronger versus lefties than versus righties, but putting up solid numbers because I think he's just good enough versus righties that it's kind of pushing him up this list a bit. And now at number 4, Ron Gant, 2,704 plate appearances, 355 WOBA, 0.11 weighted runs above average per 100. So very, very little separating Sid Gordon, George Kell, and Ron Gant kind of in that tier there, 354, 355. Stronger versus lefties than versus right. Another right-handed bat. But again, he's able to kind of be up this list because he does just enough versus righties that he's able to kind of be higher up this list. Plays second base or left field. I really hope that you're not playing him in center field. Please don't. It's not going to go well for you. And then now going into our top 3, we find Bernard Gilkey, of all people. I think this is a little bit of a small sample size issue because I think he had some really good tournaments. And then as I added more plate appearances, he definitely was trending down a little bit. So I think if I were to continue adding data to this, you would see this. Well, Gabagoo really likes it. I think you would see this continue to trend down a little bit. But here he is, 1,957 plate appearances for a 357 WOBA, 0.36 weighted runs above average per 100. A bat score of 64.27, and then versus righties 62.97. So a little bit low on the score side, but a bit more balanced profile, which I think maybe is what's helping him out a little bit. Okay. So maybe the fact that he's a little bit more balanced is helping him out. Draws a nice, is better at drawing walks versus righties than he is versus lefties. So again, I think the only splits that you see here are you're trading doubles for walks, which is kind of an interesting trade to make. And of course, maybe a little bit better of a right field defense profile with the 64 range, 61 air, and 94 arm, but he only plays in left field. And then number 2 is first baseman John Kruk, and I think we know why he's number 2. We'll get to that in a minute. 6,426 plate appearances, a 372 WOBA, 1.77 weighted runs above average per 100. And guess what? We found our first strong left-handed bat. Just 60.36 versus lefties and a 71.04 versus righties. When you get to face 67% right-handed pitching, that is good. Because why? And Jason Henke, thank you for your follows. So, eligible to play in the corner outfield positions, but really you just want to play him at first base and have him go to work. And at 79 overall, he only costs you 4 points, and you get definitely some well above average production out of him. And then at number 1, right fielder, the elusive Paul O'Neill. That apostrophe, it wreaks havoc. 4,742 plate appearances, a 382 WOBA for 2.65 weighted runs above average per 100. And he obviously is stronger versus lefties than he is versus righties, but he's still very, very good versus righties, which is why I think we're seeing him up this high, because at 67.05 versus righties, I think that only one that we saw higher than that maybe was John Kruk. So 72.67 versus lefties and 67.05 versus righties. High BABIP, and high BABIP plus a fair amount of walks equals a very, very high amount of production. I think you probably want to play him in left field, even though the range is a little bit low. You really don't want to play his 50 arm in right field. And maybe he gets a little bit better in left field as the tournament goes on. All right, so that wraps up our silver options. All right, so moving on with our gold cards that are used in the high silver floor cap tournament. Let me move out of the way over here. Coming in at number 15, it is Platinum Series 1 Edition shortstop Michael Young. 1,408 plate appearances, a 342 WOBA, negative 1.05 weighted runs above average per 100. So getting a below average bat for somebody that's going to cost you 12 of your cap points makes me a little bit hesitant. The defense is very good, covers all. However, that being said, he covers all 4 infield positions, first, second, third, and short. And we see somebody who, again, as a right-handed hitter, is very good versus lefties, not great versus righties, which that kind of makes his stats make sense because, again, you're facing 67% right-handed pitching in this tournament. So yeah, good at utility at all four infield positions. But again, a little bit of a below average bat for somebody that costs you 12 of your cap points, and you don't have a whole lot of those to go around because of the high floor. At number 14, it's first baseman all-star Jack Clark. And yes, you will be seeing the other edition of Jack Clark later on. Spoiler alert. 2,239 plate appearances, a 342 WOBA, so just a little bit below league average, with a negative .69 weighted runs above average per 100 plate appearances, 69.85 versus lefties, and 69.54 versus righties. I'm a little bit surprised that is that low. Maybe it's the low BABIP and low strikeout combination, because I feel like with that high of a power and that high of an eye, he should be doing a little bit better than that. Doesn't offer you much defensively. Maybe it's a little bit of a designated hitter penalty that's holding him back a little bit. I'm not 100% sure. And of course, it might also be, it's still a little bit of a small sample size, so that might also be an issue. At number 13, it is Troy Tulowitzki, 1,543 plate appearances, a 352 WOBA, so nearly league average here, negative .13 on the weighted runs above average per 100 plate appearances. Another bat that is very strong versus lefties, and okay versus righties. The 64.97, so, does enough versus righties to be nearly league average. However, the shortstop defense is a problem. Low range, doesn't commit any errors, but a little bit of a weak arm, and doesn't really get to as much as you would want your shortstop to get to, so kind of tough to play him at shortstop when you're not really getting above average batting production. But moving on to number 12, again, we find a little bit of a surprise here with Richard Hidalgo. 1,584 plate appearances, a 354 WOBA, so just slightly above league average, 0.04 on the weighted runs above average per 100. His bat score is 60.64 and 61.8. So his splits do favor the pitching percentages, and of course he provides solid defense across all three outfield positions. Although I'd say the arm is probably a little weak for right field, but he's got great range for center field or left field, and hits a few home runs. I guess it's because the power is, your splits are power versus righties, and then doubles versus lefties. So I guess that's the one thing that is kind of pushing him up a little bit higher on this list than you would maybe expect him to be. All right, I gotta let the dog outside. Okay, cool. Go on. This YouTube video is going to need a ton of editing. At number 11, a little bit surprised that he's this low, but here's your tournament edition third baseman, Toby Harrah. 5,649 plate appearances, a 359 WOBA, so above league average, weighted runs above average per 100 of 0.51. But again, it's that profile of him being a right-handed batter, and with 67% of the pitchers being right-handed, I think it holds him back a little bit. Versus lefties, bat score of 74.11, 66.90 versus righties. More power versus lefties, more walks versus righties, or versus lefties, I mean. BABIP is the same, though, and the avoid K is the same, so really the splits are just the power and then the massive 125 walk rating. Does play second, third, or short. He's best at second base, at least according to the position ratings. At number 10, it's tournament edition Pedro Guerrero. 1,876 plate appearances, a 360 WOBA, so definitely getting above average here with .61 runs above average per 100 plate appearances. Almost neutral on his splits, just draws a few less basically draws less walks versus righties. That is just about the only difference. So 73.34 and then 72.17. And plays 5 positions, although I don't recommend playing him at third base or center field. I recommend playing him in first base or left field is where you would want to play him. At number 9, it is Platinum Series 1 Edition Hack Wilson. 5,484 plate appearances, a 361 WOBA, .71 rated runs above average per 100 plate appearances. So we see another guy here stronger versus righties than he is versus lefties with some big reverse splits. Lots of power both ways, but also draws more walks versus righties. Does strike out a lot. Can't really play center field defense. This is definitely a designated hitter, which also might be why you're seeing him being a little bit lower on this list than you might necessarily expect. But it is a reverse splits here. He is a right-handed batter who draws more walks versus righties. Nearly the same power-wise, BABIP-wise, K-wise, etc. It's just the big split there is the doubles and the walks, but the walks being the main driving force of that. At number 8, it's tournament edition Gavi Cravath. 1,254 plate appearances, a 362 WOBA, .76 runs above average per 100. Again, very neutral here on the profile, 74.33 and 73.09. Plays solid right field defense, hits for a pretty good amount of power, and also with a high BABIP and a high walk rate. So definitely one of your better options here if you aren't quite spending all the way up at right field and you're looking for more of a mid-tier option where, again, he's costing you 14 of your points and you don't have a whole lot of them going around. Next up is another very popular option here. It's number 7 right fielder Rocky Colavito. 5,419 plate appearances, a 363 WOBA, .90 runs above average per 100 plate appearances. Better versus lefties than he is versus righties. And again, I think we're continuing to see that trend where, you don't necessarily get all of the production that you would think that you would get because of the predominance of right-handed pitching in this tournament environment. Stand by. Dogs and kids, man. Trying to sit down here and record a video, and everybody needs something. All right. Yes, Rocky is good. I think we'll see that there are a few better gold options, though. However, I mean, it's not like he only costs you 7 points, so there are worse ways to spend 7 points than there are here than Rocky Colavito. At number 6 is one of the better ways to spend 7 points. It's first baseman John Morrill, 3,229 plate appearances, a 364 WOBA, 1.01 on the weighted runs above average per 100. 72.29 versus lefties and 72.13 versus righties, so almost no splits. Plays okay-ish defense at first base, which, I mean, thankfully defense at first base isn't super important. Does have a fair amount of strikeouts. However, he's got a high BABIP and an excellent I rating, which is why I think we find him up on this list here at number 6. At number 5, it's another first baseman that costs you 3 more points for maybe slightly better defense. Actually, no, I think Morrill's defense is actually probably better. I think the problem with his first base rating is I think he's only like 5'10" or something, so it's just his height. At number 5, first baseman Hank Greenberg. 2,689 plate appearances for a 369 WOBA, 1.49 weighted runs above average per 100. And again, we find another very balanced profile here at 73.23 versus lefties and 71.4 versus righties. Okay BABIP, but lots of power, lots of walks, which are all things that you want to see. At number 4, it is a fan favorite, 89 overall tournament edition, Vern Stevens. 3,262 plate appearances for a 373 WOBA. Weighted runs above average per 100 of 1.82. So again, if you go deep in the tournament, he's basically providing you with 2 extra runs above an average player. A little bit stronger versus lefties than he is versus righties, but, still strong both ways there at 73.79 and 69.8. Plays third base or shortstop equally well. Good range, good error, good at turning double plays. Weakest point is his arm, which probably would lend him to play shortstop more than it would be third base. At number 3... oh, guess what? It's a left-handed batter who absolutely mashes right-handed pitching. 3,458 plate appearances for Bobby Abreu, a 377 WOBA, 2.18 weighted runs above average per 100 plate appearances. So his bat score is just 65 versus lefties, 77.01 versus righties. I'm pretty sure this is the highest score that we've seen versus righties. And again, I keep talking about this because it keeps coming up. When you're facing 67% right-handed pitching, this is the guy you want out there. Can play either corner, low range, okay air, strong arm, so more of a right field, I think, more of a right field fielding profile than a left field fielding profile. Yeah, great versus righties. This is somebody that you want to look out for in this tournament. At number 2, it's left fielder Charlie Keller. 1,161 plate appearances, 381 WOBA, 2.52 on the weighted runs above average per 100 plate appearances. Guess what? 67.75 versus lefties and 72.89 versus righties. And solid corner outfield position. So good luck choosing a corner outfielder, I guess. 88 rating in left field, 76 rating in right field. I think you definitely want to play him in left field, with the range being a little bit better than the arm. But again, yes, it's a small sample size, especially considering that we have some players in here with 10,000, 15,000, even 20,000 plate appearances. But given the fact that we know what the trend is towards pitching, finding these left-handed batters like this, like Charlie Keller here, with the 98 power and 85 I versus righties really stands out. This would be a fantastic tournament edition card to use here in the high silver floor. And then at number 1, guess what? It's somebody who mashes right-handed pitching. Third baseman Eddie Matthews, 3,439 plate appearances, a 386 WOBA, 3.03 weighted runs above average per 100 plate appearances. I think the 386 WOBA and for somebody that only costs you 7 cap points is absolutely outstanding. That's that's better than most of the diamonds, better than some of the perfect cards even. And obviously we'll get to those here coming up. But yeah, this card in this tournament environment absolutely slaps. Yes, you are correct. 62.32 versus lefties, 74.02 versus righties, which of course is driven predominantly by the 110 power and the 95 I rating. The third base defense is average at best, but again, I don't think that you really care when you're getting, for 7 cap points, you're getting this level of offensive production. All right. Oh, I don't have to move out of the way this time. Okay, so the diamond cards is definitely a much smaller player pool. How are we doing on our timer here on ads? Okay, so I think we have enough time to get through the diamond cards and then have another ad break before we do the perfect cards and then move on to the pitching. Again, so you're seeing definitely a smaller player pool here. I did kind of expand it down a little bit, including guys with less than 1,000 plate appearances, like All-Star Ted Williams and first baseman Tournament Edition Prince Fielder. Basically, this is Ken Griffey Jr. and Jack Clark, and then everybody else is used a little, only slightly. At number 10, did I have 10 on this list? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Uh-oh, I think this is old. I don't think I updated this. I don't think that should be number 10. Well, I guess we'll see what we got here. I think I forgot to update that picture. At number 10, first baseman Prince Fielder. 1,362 plate appearances. I definitely forgot to update that picture because he did not have 1,300 plate appearances. 356 WOBA, 0.24 weighted runs above average. This one is a little bit odd to me. I feel like this should be higher than this. Maybe it's a little bit of an issue with it being kind of a smaller sample size. But 74 versus lefties, 77.76 versus righties. This is a card that should definitely be scoring or be performing better than what it is. Unless it's the fact that the I is maybe a little bit low at 77. I don't know. This one is a little bit confusing to me. Because I look at the ratings, I look at the bat score, and then I see the actual production, and it doesn't quite line up, which makes me think that it's just a bit of a sample size issue. At number 9, we find second baseman Fred Pfeffer, 1,044 plate appearances, a 361 WOBA, 0.71 weighted runs above average. Solid production at second base, sort of at shortstop, 68.93 versus lefties, 68.31 versus righties. I think this is really the only reason he's up here is because he had a couple really hot tournaments and it's a small sample size. I don't think that this performs better than Prince Fielder over a longer term. At number 8, we find limited edition Hack Wilson. This one can actually play in the field. 1,653 plate appearances, 374 WOBA, 1.93 on the weighted runs above average per 100 plate appearances. Very much a left-handed heavy profile, however. 80.37 versus lefties, 74.11 versus righties. A massive 147 power versus lefties. But without left-handed pitching to use it against, how much good is it actually doing for you? This one can actually play, however, he can actually play defense in left field. You don't have to exclusively use him as a designated hitter. At number 7, we find limited edition Ken Griffey Jr., 5,584 plate appearances, a 378 WOBA, 2.26 weighted runs above average per 100, 66.55 versus lefties, and 73.70 versus righties. I think the only reason that he's not higher is because there's some phenomenal left-handed bats coming up, which we'll see here in just a moment. But I think this is the best defender that we've seen in center field yet, with the 88 range, 83 air, and 81 arm. I think there was only one card that might have had more range than him. I think Hidalgo might have more range than him, but the other defensive metrics aren't quite as good. At number 6, it's a right fielder, Giancarlo Stanton. 1,644 plate appearances, a 382 WOBA, 2.67 weighted runs above average per 100. 79.83 versus lefties, 70.9 versus righties. So, my only guess is that he's platooning and doing very, very well against the limited amount of left-handed pitching that we see. That's the only reason that I can think of for him to be performing this well. At number 5, it's first baseman Jimmy Fox. 2,398 plate appearances, a 390 WOBA, 3.38 weighted runs above average per 100. Bit of a balanced profile, a little bit better versus lefties. 76.74 versus 72.88. It's a very popular card because obviously as a live mission reward card, a lot of people have him. So it is a popular option in a lot of different formats. And we see the, again, performing okay, but I think that you can probably do a little bit better here. And we'll get to, I think there's some better, obviously we'll get to some better first base options in just a couple minutes here. At number 4, we find right fielder Babe Ruth with his 1,938 plate appearances, a 394 WOBA, 3.81 weighted runs above average per 100 plate appearances. So you're getting nearly 4 runs worth of production, 4 more runs worth of production from Babe Ruth than you are from an average hitter, which is outstanding, really. Obviously, he's good versus lefties, great versus righties. Can sort of play left field, so you don't even have to exclusively DH him, which is nice. And I think he's good enough in this tournament to not need to be platooned either. And then at number 3, we find the Diamond Tournament Edition Jack Clark, a right fielder. 5,144 plate appearances, 395 WOBA, 3.83. So again, I think this is a virtual tie with, it's basically a tie with Babe Ruth, 3.81 versus 3.83. Very strong versus the lefties, 86.15, and then 75.48 versus righties. This is probably a platoon bat. Defensively, I guess you probably want to play him in right field over first base. Limited range, limited error, but he's got the arm to maybe make some plays. Good power. I say good power. Great power, great gap, and then, of course, 125 walk rating. The only thing sort of slightly holding him back is, again, you're going to be facing a lot of right-handed pitching. So if you can construct your lineups so that Jack Clark gets the majority of his plate appearances, which again, he's very popular here with 5,000 plate appearances. If you can construct your lineup and construct your roster so that he's facing, you know, the left-handed pitching options that are available, yeah, I think this is a fantastic option. And obviously the performance backs it up. And then at number 2, it's left fielder Ted Williams. A limited sample size of 997 plate appearances. A 412 on the WOBA, though. I think that's the first one we've seen over 400 for a 5.48 weighted runs above average per 100 plate appearances. Again, 71.58 versus lefties and a whopping 85.19 versus righties. I'll let you figure out why he's so good. All right, and then at number 1, everybody's favorite designated hitter, it's Edgar Martinez with 1,704 plate appearances, a 420 WOBA. Light him up. Weighted runs above average per 100 of 6.19. 87 versus lefties and 79.52 versus righties. Obviously, it's great versus lefties, and then I think it's holds up versus righties as well, which is why he comes in as the number 1 diamond card. All right, so our perfect position players, definitely a high tier of that everybody uses, and then kind of a sprinkling of everybody else. At number 1, at least usage-wise, it's Hank Aaron and William McCovey, King Kelly, Bullet Joe Rogan, Lou Gehrig, Brooks Robinson, Joe Morgan, Jackie Robinson. The new Oscar Charleston makes an appearance here on this list. He's up to 2,000 plate appearances, as well as the new Luke Appling. And yes, his name is Luke Appling too, because up until just a couple days ago, the Luke Appling 100 and the Luke Appling 75 had the exact same card title, which was unbelievably annoying. But here we are with our perfect players. All right, now I'm going to move back out of the way. Not the mute button, this button. I swear I'm a professional. Not really. All right. At number 10, reverse WOBA order. It is shortstop Luke Appling, the Platinum Series 2 Missions, plural, reward card. 1,629 plate appearances, a 397 WOBA, 4.07 weighted runs above average per 100. Pretty even on the split, 78.42 versus lefties, 77.91 versus righties. However, with again, you're getting a well above league average bat here with 4 runs per 100 plate appearances. Plus, you're getting outstanding defense here as well with 98 range, 91 air, 96 arm, and 97 turn double play. Basically, the only thing that he doesn't do is hit home runs. But he draws a lot of walks and hits a lot of doubles and triples. So, solid option here at number 10, Luke Appling. Next, it's second baseman Jackie Robinson. 6,252 plate appearances, a 4.01 WOBA, 4.42 weighted runs above average, 78.88 and 77.35. Plus, plays an excellent second base. Not a lot of BABIP, not a lot of power, but doesn't strike out and draws a lot of walks. At number 8, it's third baseman loyalty reward Brooks Robinson. I sold my Brooks Robinson to fund all of my Platinum Series 2 purchases. Actually, no, that's not when I sold Brooks Robinson. I sold Brooks Robinson to chase Albert Pujols, and I didn't get Albert Pujols. So, hopefully we can still get one eventually. At this point, I probably should have just sold Brooks Robinson and held on to all the other points that I spent on packs and just bought Albert Pujols. Yeah. Anyways, 8,118 plate appearances, a 405 WOBA, 4.82 weighted runs above average per 100. 82.29 versus lefties, 79.27 versus righties. So not favorable splits given what we know of the makeup of pitching staffs in this tournament. However, it's the best fielding third baseman available, depending on how much. So factor that in, however much you want to rate defense at third base, or however much that factors into your roster building. At number 7, it's right fielder King Kelly. However, 9,573 plate appearances at catcher, and then 5,129 at right field. Tranquil Hill Farms, what's up, man? 406 WOBA, 4.91 weighted runs above average per 100. Nice balanced profile here at 82.78, 81.15. Obviously, is predominantly used at catcher. However, he is also used at right field. But again, that's probably, what is that, a 60-40-ish split, or maybe a little bit more than that? Probably a little bit more than that. Yeah, it's like about a 67-33 split on where his usage is at. At number 6, it's your most popular perfect card, 19,598 plate appearances for Hank Aaron, a 409 WOBA, 5.14 weighted runs above average per 100. The problem with Hank Aaron is that he is a 91.95 versus lefties, but only a 78.14 versus righties. Excuse me. So, we're reaching the stage where his splits are actually kind of a problem. He's absolutely fantastic versus lefties. I think there's only one batter that's better than him versus lefties. I think the new Ralph Kiner card is better than him versus lefties. But that's really it. However, we see a big split here. And in this tournament where it's predominantly right-handed pitching, that is kind of presenting a problem where you might be better off spending one of your perfect spots on somebody else. At number 5, it's second baseman Joe Morgan, 7,718 plate appearances, a 409 WOBA, 5.17 weighted runs above average per 100, 71.74 versus lefties, but a 82.28 versus righties. So as a left-handed batter, he plays perfectly into the opposing pitching usage, because again, remember from the first slide, it was 67% versus 67% right-handed pitching and 33% left-handed pitching. At number 4, it's another left-handed bat. This time it's right fielder Larry Walker, 1,362 plate appearances, a 410 WOBA, 5.25 weighted runs above average per 100. 73.53 versus lefties, 82.69 versus righties. Plays great defense out there in the outfield as well, and then absolutely mashes right-handed pitching. So again, guess what? It's another left-handed bat that is outproducing the other bats available here. I mean, these three are like separated by minuscule percentage points here, right? 409, 409, and 410. But if you're looking for just that final little bit of an edge, it might be spending one of your perfect spots on left-handed batting. At third, it's first baseman Roger Connor, just 882 plate appearances, but a 427 WOBA, good for a 6.87 weighted runs above average per 100 plate appearances. 78.62 versus lefties, 81.48 versus righties. Plays excellent first base defense, and obviously is a left-handed batter, so that plays right into what the pitching makeup is for this tournament. And then at number 2, It's another first baseman. This time it's Willie McCovey. 16,520 plate appearances, a 4.33 WOBA, 7.36 runs above average. Solid versus lefties at 80.67. Really stands out versus righties, 87.33. Plays good defense at first base. And then the number one performing card overall, I'll give you 3 guesses and then let you know that it rhymes with Shmoo Schmerig. It's first baseman Lou Gehrig, 12,066 plate appearances, a 4.38 WOBA, so not quite as wide of a gap over Willie McCovey. If you don't have Gehrig and you only have McCovey like me, you're missing out on a little, but not as much. 7.85 weighted runs above average per 100, 86.37 versus lefties, 92.07 versus righties. So, yeah, it's the best bat in the game overall. It's the best bat in the game versus right-handed pitching. And again, in a tournament that's made up of 67% right-handed pitching, here you are. All right, that concludes our batting. So now we'll move on to the pitching, which should go a little bit quicker. Because once we get past silver pitching, there's just not a whole lot to talk about. Let me move down here so I'm out of the way so that you can see the score, see the cards usage here. This is innings pitched. It's a lot of 75s. Herb Score, Kenny Rogers, Johan Santana, I think, is not quite a 75, but it's 75, 76s, 77s. A couple 79s smattered in there. All right. At number 15, and again, this is also in reverse WOBA against order. So Nelson Dean, 75 overall, doesn't cost you any cap points. 1,800 plate appearances. Started in just 7% of his appearances were starts. A 354 WOBA against. This one, I think that you're going to want more right-handed pitching, but maybe not like 67% right-handed pitching, because again, I think the batting split was like 55, 35, and 10, right? Does that add up? Yeah, 55, 35, and 10. So, yeah, that's kind of a tough one. Because it's a fairly even split on the batters. At number 14, that's only costing you 2 points, Tom Zachary, a tournament edition card. Actually used quite a bit as a starter. 51% of his appearances were as starts, a 351 WOBA against. Great movement, solid control, and lots of balls in play. So with the low stuff, definitely want to have a good defense behind Tom Zachary. At number 13, Steve Busby, 2,079 innings pitched, 29% games started, a 350 WOBA against, 57.27 versus lefties, 65.92 versus righties. So makes sense that he's popular, makes sense that he has an okay amount of success, because you do see predominantly right-handed batting. At number 12, it's the limited edition 75 overall Carl Hubble. 1,058 plate appearances. Innings pitched. We're on pitchers now. 1,058 innings pitched. 34% games started. A 350 WOBA against. Stronger versus righties than he is versus lefties. I believe those are reverse splits, right? Because he's a left-handed pitcher, so those are definitely reverse splits. Which you would think would be extremely useful in this format. Des223, thank you for the follow. At number 11, it's another free card. This time it's Kevin Brown. 2,141 innings pitched, 16% games started, a 346 WOBA against. 60.13 versus lefties, 64.05 versus righties. Has the low high low profile that is so prevalent this year. That's a good question because you can't use both Hubbles and both Browns at the same time. So you got to pick. I would think that the 75 Hubble users are using 100 Brown, and then if you're using 75 Brown, you would be using the 100 Hubble. That's something that I hadn't thought of. That's a very good point, Burner. Because obviously you can't use all four of them. You have to pick one Hubble and one Brown to use. So that's a very good point. At number 10, we get Herb Score, who I believe is a lefty. 3,463 I keep saying plate appearances because I'm getting tired. Innings pitched, a 7% game started, a 346 WOBA against. 64.68 versus lefties, 63.05 versus righties. So not really much there on the splits. Great stuff though here. Lots and lots of strikeouts. Not a lot of balls in play, although the movement and the control might be a bit of an issue. MFGV00, thank you for the follow. At number 9, it's starting pitcher Kenny Rogers, another free card at 75. Lots and lots of these are basically bullpen guys. And there's some solid arms here, though. Although I'm a little bit surprised at his success, given that there's a lot of right-handed batters. 2,477 innings pitched, just 2% games started, a 345 WOBA against. Great versus lefties, not good versus righties. The 75, 77, maybe. I guess if he's in your bullpen and you're using him to come in late against some of those big left-handed bats like Gehrig or McCovey or Larry Walker, Joe Morgan. If he's coming in against those guys, I guess that would make sense why he's sort of having some level of success here. But obviously at number 9, there's several silver pitchers that are better than him still. At number 8, it's Webster McDonald, 1,267 innings pitched. Just 6% of his games have been as a starter. A 344 WOBA against. Pretty low score here, 58.3 and 60.25. But great control, which is maybe what's helping him out here, as that kind of stands out amongst his ratings. At number 7, starting pitcher Jim Maloney, 1,223 innings pitched, 3% games started, a 343 WOBA against. Pretty low score here again, 57.23 and 55.87. But I guess maybe the fact that his stuff is so high is really kind of what's pushing him higher up this list than you might expect, given some of the other options that we've seen. And it might just be that this pitching profile, with the high stuff and movement and control not being as important. Maybe? I don't know. I'm also getting tired, so. At number 6, we see another one of these high stuff, although he's got we'll call it medium movement and then low control. Future legend, Asa Lacy, 1,773 innings pitched, just 2% games started, 341 WOBA, 62.87 versus lefties, 59 versus righties. Obviously, this is a free bullpen arm that is useful against some of those better left-handed bats. So if he's coming in to face guys like Morgan or Walker, Gehrig, McCovey, some of those top left-handed bats are hopefully when you're using Asa Lacy. At number 5, another starting pitcher who only pitches out of the bullpen because he's a 75 overall, it's Turk Farrell. 1,350 innings pitched, no starts, a 339 WOBA against. One thing to consider, and I just remembered this, all of these starting pitchers are, their scores are taken with a grain of salt, I think, because their score is actually going to be higher than what it is because they're being used as a reliever and they're getting the stuff boost, which, however, is now hidden. So basically, he's got 80 stuff when you factor in his 4 pitches, but when you narrow that down to using him as a reliever, you're maybe only using the fastball and slider, and so that stuff jumps from probably an 80 to a 95-ish, somewhere in that range would be my guess. So there is a way to, you can kind of draw out that correlation and look at, his top 2 pitches and then find similar pitchers and maybe get an idea of what his stuff is more accurately coming out of the bullpen. Pedro Ramos at number 4, 1,635 plate appearances. This is a very, very popular option for a 4th or 5th starter. 93% of his games are as a starter. A 336 WOBA, a 63.02 score versus lefties, 61.08 score versus righties. This is your first really, really predominant starter here. And again, he only costs 4 points against the cap. And I think a lot of players use him as their 4th or 5th starter. At number 3, it's Platinum Series 1 edition Johan Santana. 2,311 innings pitched, 44% games started, a 335 WOBA against. Very strong score versus lefties with 69.55. A little bit weaker versus righties, 63.75. But again, we see somebody who's got 113 stuff as a starter. When you move him to the bullpen, and he's just doing fastball changeup and not really, kind of ignoring his slider, that stuff gets a pretty significant boost. It's probably in the mid 130s, given how high these, those 2 pitching ratings are. At number 2, again, I think this is the profile here that's holding up is these guys that have one, outstanding pitch, and when you move them to the bullpen, they get to ignore one of their worst pitches. And so we see this high stuff, low movement, high control profile keep popping up here because outside of Johan Santana, your top 5 pitchers, Turk Farrell, Pedro Ramos, Santana, his stuff is kind of an extreme bit of an outlier here, which is why he's up here. But then Ken Johnson, again, you're seeing this where that stuff is not really an 85. It's a 95 when he's coming out of the bullpen. 1,400 innings pitched, 5% games started, a 334 WOBA against. And again, all of the things that we've talked about as far as when you move starting pitchers to the bullpen. And you don't see that out front on the card anymore. That stays hidden. At number 1 is starting pitcher Scott Ellerton. 1,300 plate appearances, 5% of them as a starter. A 328 WOBA against, 60.85 score versus lefties, 62.8 versus righties. Again, only 39 stamina. I don't know why anybody's using him in their starting rotation. Only costs you 1 point. Put him in your bullpen. Let that sinker go to work. Have a good outfield defense because he's an extreme fly ball. And so, out of the bullpen, his stuff rating is really only comprised of his curveball and his sinker. Because basically your top 2 pitches are the ones that get used when you're a reliever. It's interesting that his best pitch is a sinker, but he's an extreme fly ball pitcher. I do find that very interesting. And I wonder if that plays a part in it as well. All right, and now is where we move quickly. Gold pitchers, because of the nature of the tournament, there's not really very many of them used. It's basically Kevin Brown and Double Duty Radcliffe, and then sort of John Candelaria, except not really. Coming in at number 3, extreme ground ball, low, high, low profile guy, Kevin Brown, 3,179 innings pitched, 93% games started, a 343 WOBA. Better versus righties than he is versus lefties. Extreme ground ball. This 87 overall is obviously very, very good, but I don't think it's quite holding up here because that 343 WOBA is not fantastic. Double Duty Radcliffe, if I remember correctly, he didn't even make the top 15 in the looking at the gold bats. I can go back later, or I think I'll have it displayed later at the end, where you can see where he ranks WOBA wise. But across 1,263 innings pitched, 84% of games started, a 342 WOBA against. A pretty strong score here. Again, we see medium stuff, high movement, and then low to medium control. 5 pitches that are basically identical, except for his changeup. And then number 1 out of the gold pitchers, very, very small sample size here, 89 overall, John Candelaria, just 780 innings pitched, 100% of them as a starter, 336 on the WOBA against, 69.03 versus lefties, 66.27 versus righties. But similar to Scott Ellerton, it's high stuff and high movement and then low control. So maybe, that's, you want like 2 high things, right? We've seen high stuff, high movement, or high stuff, high control, low movement be good. We've also seen high stuff, high movement, and low control be good. So a couple different options here to consider when you're looking at your pitching profiles. I included these guys just because, but basically nobody uses diamond pitchers. You either use perfect pitchers, gold Kevin Brown, and then 75 overall pitchers. Number 3, Nolan Ryan. Again, just 358 innings pitched, 98% games started, a 339 WOBA, 75, 47 versus lefties, 74, 67 versus righties. Fantastic stuff with the great fastball and great curveball. I think coming out of the bullpen would be a much better option for him, but nobody, in a cap tournament, you're not spending 21 of your cap points for a bullpen arm who's going to, maybe pitch, 5, 6, 7 times a tournament, unless you go very, very deep in the tournament. But yeah, you're much better off spending those points elsewhere. Number 2, it's the new Hardware Heroes 98 overall Randy Johnson. Again, just 354 innings pitched, 100% games started, a 303 WOBA. And see, now, even with the small sample size, I think we're running into a situation where, that's well enough below average or above average that, maybe you consider shaving a couple points from one of your starting pitchers and using this Randy Johnson card instead of one of the perfect cards that you'll see later on. But again, versus lefties, it's got absolutely amazing stuff. 148 stuff, 96 movement, and 69 control, which may be nice enough that this card holds up in a starting role and doesn't have to be used as a bullpen. And I think the early returns on that kind of reflect that with that 303 WOBA against, which is very, very good. And then number 1, 465 innings pitched, 100% of them as a starter. It's another 98 overall, a 303 WOBA against Sid Fernandez. Mr. Reverse splits himself here, 72.87 versus lefties, 76.18 versus righties. Again, we see the high stuff, high movement, low control profile here being very, very useful. And again, that 303 WOBA, even with the small sample size, is definitely something that makes you think. Because that's, well, you'll see when we go through the perfect pitchers, that's pretty good. And now for the perfect pitchers, as we've mentioned a couple times now, Bullet Joe Rogan, definitely the most popular one used there. Vida Blue, Jerry Royce, Kevin Brown, Carl Hubble, and then a little bit of Derringer, McCormick, and Pedro Martinez, but much smaller sample sizes on those last three. At number 8, 5,458 innings pitched. It's perfect to build a lineup. Kevin Brown, used exclusively as a starter, a 311 WOBA against. Again, it's like, I guess at this point 90 is mid, so mid-high mid on the pitching profile. Maybe you want a little bit more out of a perfect pitcher. You're committing a lot of points here, 25 of them, and you only have 171 points to spare. So committing one of your perfect spots to Kevin Brown, maybe you want to try and look for just a slightly more of an edge. Number 7, it's Pedro Martinez. Again, small sample size here, just 845 innings pitched. All of these guys are used exclusively as a starter. 307 WOBA against. A little bit similar, although obviously better control, but a little bit similar to the Randy Johnson or Sid Fernandez profile here, with great stuff and movement, and then control being his lowest attribute. Ooh, we're almost there. Just need my voice to hold on for a couple more minutes here. All right, at number 6, it's our most popular starting pitcher because he also is a very solid bat. Which, again, I don't think that we saw his bat. So, yeah, obviously he ranks pretty low on the WOBA list for a perfect batter. But pitching-wise, 8,924 innings pitched. Again, exclusively as a starter. A 306 WOBA against. Very, very good versus righties. Big splits here. 71.92 versus lefties. 87.8 versus righties. Given that even if you include switch hitters, you're looking at about a 56-44 split on the righties versus lefties. So, he's going to see a lot of right-handed bats, unless there is, somebody who's got a lot of platoons set up, which is a little bit tough to do in a cap format. So the splits aren't quite as important in a format where you can't set up, some optimal platoons. At number 5, Vida Blue, 7,467 innings pitched, a 306 WOBA against again. A 79.83 versus lefties, 80.68 versus righties. Left-handed pitcher, but with reverse splits. And again, we see, high and then low on this, the stuff and movement, and then the low control being something that works pretty well. At number 4, it's, of course, the opposite of Vida Blue. It's Paul Derringer. 1,200 innings pitched, a 305 WOBA against. So just, 1 percentage point better, essentially, there. Good score versus both lefties and righties. 84 stuff, 108 movement, 101 control. This Platinum 2 series Paul Derringer. I know Kidneys doesn't like it because of the one hold runners. You're giving up a lot of stolen bases, but that's probably a little bit less important in a cap format where I don't think, outside of like Joe Morgan, there aren't really any base stealers being used. So I don't really think that the one hold runners matters that much. And if you're able to put together a good defense behind him, there's absolutely nothing wrong with using Paul Derringer, despite what Kidneys thinks. And he's not even here to defend himself. Number 3, Jerry Royce, 7,324 innings pitched. Again, all of them as a starter. 304 WOBA against. Very balanced profile here, 80.77 versus lefties, 81.6 versus righties. Somebody with reverse splits, he's a left-handed pitcher, who's going to face about 65% right-handed bats, given the way the 10% switch hitters who swing back and forth depending on what hand they're facing. But again, with the reverse splits, you're kind of okay with him facing a bunch of right-handed bats. And you see that reflected here with, again, the 304 WOBA against, ranking number 3 out of the perfect pitchers. At number 2, it's Cooperstown 1 reward, Carl Hubble, 3,978 innings pitched, 100% of them as a starter, a 299 WOBA against. So here at number 2, we finally get below 300 on the WOBA against. But again, it's another lefty with big reverse splits here. 81.98 versus lefties, 85 versus righties. A triple 100 here. And I think this is probably your true number 1 pitcher. Although number 1 that showed up so far was actually Jim McCormick with 1,239 innings pitched, a 297 WOBA against, 72.83 versus lefties, 82.62 versus righties. So I think what we're seeing here is that given that it's a cap format, you're just not seeing a lot of optimal platooning. So you're not seeing a lot of optimized lineups. So the fact that he's so bad versus left-handed bats isn't really hurting him that much, which is why he's able to put up a slightly better WOBA against than Carl Hubble. But were it me, I still think if I were choosing between the two of them, I would favor Carl Hubble over Jim McCormick. But that wraps up all of our most used position players and most used pitchers and how they have performed in our high silver floor cap. So, coming up here, I know I'm blocking some of this because there's a lot of information here on the screen. I will have screenshots of these put up in my Discord as well. So this information will be available. But you can see all of the different tiers, silver, gold, diamond, and perfect, in the order that they performed in my data that I have pulled for this tournament. So again, Paul O'Neill, John Kruk, Bernard Gilkey, Ron Gant, George Kell, Sid Gordon, Bob Bailey, all leading the way for silver batters. You can and this kind of lets you compare, tier to tier as well. So you can see like somebody like Gold Eddie Matthews and his 386 WOBA. For just 7 points, you're getting somebody who's nearly a top 5 Diamondback, or would be just outside the top 10 out of the most used perfect cards. Speaking of Bullet Joe Rogan, he had a 344 WOBA, so negative 0.86 weighted runs above average. So definitely basically like an average silver bat, on top of him being, number 6 overall in the pitchers. So, if you, at least as long as you recognize that you're getting, slightly below average hitting production for him, you are still getting a really good pitching production out of him. And then, where was Double Duty Radcliffe on here? On the gold, he was pretty far. Oh, you know what? I don't think he quite had enough plate appearances to be on here. Or did I filter? I think I filtered him out on accident. I think I did. Yeah, because Double Duty Radcliffe had enough plate appearances to be on here. I think I must have filtered him out on accident. So I can get that data if anybody's interested in it. And then, of course, here's the pitchers. It's basically loading up on 75s and Pedro Ramos, and then putting in perfect starters. The outside of Kevin Brown, golds and diamonds just are not used that much. But again, here is that information as well. So that is going to wrap up the video here for YouTube. Thank you for watching, and I will see you again next time.